My first love was diagnosed with cancer, and George left me at the wedding for her. Everyone told me to be considerate. She's dying, you shouldn't hold it against her. Later, she got pregnant. George asked me to raise their child. It's her dying wish. You can't be heartless about an unborn child, right? I sneered. She also wishes you could be with her till the end. Why don't you die with her? After I broke off the engagement with George, his archenemy publicly professed his love to me. George went mad, but why should I care? Whether it's George or his enemy, I want none of them. At the wedding, the big screen was showing the vlog of George and me in love. I was happily watching when I turned my head and saw George, pale and clutching his phone. What's going on? Rose is dying, he said, and then turned to leave. George, I instinctively grabbed his hand. The wedding lights came on right at that moment. The host's joyful voice echoed, now let's welcome the bride and groom. She's dying, and you still expect me to stay for the wedding? Nancy, have you no heart? George shook off my hand and walked away, without a moment's hesitation or regret, leaving me alone to face the guests' whispers and laughter. The wedding was cancelled. I was exhausted. No one explained anything to me. In what should have been a joyful new home, I was all alone. I waited for George until deep into the night, but he didn't come home. Instead, I saw he posted an update. She'll get better. I'll always be with you. The photo showed Rose, pale with a sad face, sitting on a hospital bed, holding a hand. People might not recognize it, but I did. It was George's hand. His hand had a little red mole on the base of his index finger, and the comments below were encouraging him to stay with Rose. Even his buddy posted, honestly, your wife is so selfish. When it's life and death, she only thinks about her wedding. So they knew it was my wedding with George today. I laughed bitterly and called my lawyer. I want a divorce. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, George didn't come back, but his mom did. She rushed into our bedroom to pack George's clothes. George is moving to the hospital. Faced with my question, she looked a bit guilty. Nancy, Rose has cancer with little time left. You know how patients overthink. They need someone by their side. Be more understanding. Can't her family be with her? Rose grew up with us. We are her family. Hearing this, I found it ridiculous. They are all one family, and what about me? Am I the outsider? I went to the hospital. I quickly found Rose in the ward. The originally plain room was decorated warmly. There were cute decorations, stuffed toys, and even a bouquet of sunflowers on the windowsill. The nurse leading me there smiled and praised. Nice, right? This gentleman did it all by himself. Because Rose likes sunflowers, he searched the whole city last night to buy them for her. Truly devoted. George never gave me flowers. Even for decorating our new home, he just said, you handle it. I don't like doing these things. I thought he just wasn't the romantic type. Till this moment, seeing him break his principles for someone else, I realized he understood romance. But his romance wasn't for me. By the window, George was carefully feeding Rose. I tried to tell myself, Rose is sick. This is between George and me. Don't cause a scene in the hospital. But my heart ached terribly. I took a deep breath and politely knocked on the door. Knock, knock. Facing the door, Rose looked over first. I didn't say anything, yet she turned pale, and in a panic, knocked the bowl out of George's hand. Rose. George was startled, grabbed Rose's burnt hand, and rushed to the bathroom. I instinctively followed but was scolded by George. What are you doing here? To get an explanation, George seemed to suddenly remember leaving me yesterday, his face becoming uneasy. Seeing this, Rose started crying loudly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to ruin your wedding. I was just so scared. I didn't know who else to rely on. Rose, it's okay. No one blames you. Don't cry. George hurriedly wiped her tears away. George, it's my fault. Nancy has every right to be angry. Maybe you should go back with her. I can manage alone at the hospital. Don't talk nonsense. George, looking hurt, pulled the about to leave Rose into his arms. Rose cried even harder, clutching George's shirt like a lifeline. George, I'm not afraid to die. I just can't let go of you. I only have you. Seeing them tightly embrace, I felt like an extra for the first time. Nancy, you should leave. We'll talk later. Seeing me still standing there, George became impatient. I left the hospital. Driving home, I received a message from Rose. Nancy, don't worry. I won't take George from you. You are engaged after all. I'll give him back when I die. Give him back? Didn't you say you wouldn't take him? Then why talk about giving him back? You know that's not what I mean. I just have little time left. I want to be selfish once. Can you let me have him for this last bit of time? You have so much time together. I only want a little. Are you really going to fight a dying person for it? Just because she's dying, do I have to yield in everything as a healthy person? Why? I didn't want to get mad at a patient, but Rose kept provoking me. I was about to curse her out, but George called first. Nancy, I agreed to marry you. What more do you want? Does humiliating a sick person bring you joy? I didn't. Rose cried herself unconscious, and you're still lying. Nancy, you've changed. The way you are now makes you feel like a stranger to me. Am I the one who's changed? George stayed silent. Just because I'm still alive and healthy, does it mean I'm not allowed to be sad and upset? Even if my wedding is ruined and my husband rushes to be with another woman? That's not what I meant. Then what do you mean? Tell me. George didn't answer. He hastily hung up the phone. But before hanging up, I heard Rose say on the other end, George, I'm hurting. I want a divorce from George. When Rose was alive, I could never win. Now that she's dead, I'll always be second to a deceased woman. After all, memories of the dead only become more perfect over time. But I can't just let George off easy, especially since I paid for half of this house. I also paid for all the renovations and carefully decorated it myself. Hello, Nancy. I'm MIA, the lawyer you contacted yesterday. Soon enough, the lawyer I contacted came over. I had considered divorce the moment George abandoned me at our wedding to be with Rose. Regarding the divorce, I'll represent you fully against George. Rest assured, I will secure the best outcome for you. Okay, I nodded. MIA, I have one more question. Please, go ahead. I have receipts and a detailed list of all my expenses for the renovations. Now that we're divorcing, am I entitled to handle these items? Absolutely, the lawyer confirmed confidently. I smiled and immediately called the contractor I had used before. Come over and demolish everything we installed. I can't stand anything George has used. There was so much stuff that it took the contractor 2 days to finish the job. And in those 2 days, George didn't come home. I tore up all our photos together, keeping only George's half. Because of the extensive commotion, many neighbors started talking. But I didn't care. I rented an apartment to stay in temporarily. Finally, after being alerted by the divorce lawyer and neighbors, George found out what had happened in the last 2 days. I didn't answer his calls, so he bombarded me with questioning messages. I knew it was time to go back. When I arrived, George was standing in the midst of the wrecked house, looking livid. Nancy, what kind of drama are you pulling now? How laughable. The wrongdoer claims the moral high ground to criticize others. George, let's get a divorce. I was too exhausted to argue. Is it because of Rose? I stayed silent, just watching him. I've explained. Rose is sick, cancer. She doesn't have much time left. Do you really have to compete with someone who's dying? No, George, I'm competing with you. Nancy, stop playing word games with me. Rose is really pitiful. I sighed as I looked at George. What's this got to do with Rose? I crossed my legs and smiled. Exactly. What's this got to do with her? Why do you keep using her as a shield? Or do you know what you've done isn't right, and you need to pull Rose out to feel good about playing us against each other? How despicable. MIA commented from the side. George glared at MIA, fists clenched. MIA didn't flinch. Instead, she boldly stared back. I have the right to speak, and if you hit a lawyer, you can face the consequences. I don't agree to the divorce. What gave you the false impression that I'm asking for your permission? Every word felt pointless. So, I simply nodded at MIA. Leave it to me. I stood to leave when George lunged and grabbed my wrist. The grip was so tight, I felt a sharp pain, as if my bone might break. Let go. No, Nancy, I don't understand. Why has it come to this? We got married, didn't we? Didn't you call off the wedding? MIA yanked George's hand off me, shielding me. When did I ever say I called off the wedding? George tried to grab me again, but MIA shoved him away. Oh, you didn't say it. You just did it. I rubbed my now reddened wrist, speaking with irritation. Guilt flashed across George's face for a moment, but it quickly turned into harsher interrogation. We've been together for so many years, and you can just throw it all away, Nancy. Do you even have a heart? I had a heart. It died. After I had entrusted the divorce proceedings to MIA, I went on a trip. Initially, this was supposed to be my honeymoon with George, but once I embarked on the trip, I realized it wasn't so bad without him. I didn't have to painstakingly choose places George would find interesting. I didn't have to plan everything out meticulously in advance. I didn't have to consider his mood or doubt myself if he seemed displeased. I simply did what I wanted, went where I wanted, bought what I wanted. If I was tired, I'd just stay in the hotel all day. No more compromises. I lived for myself. I hadn't felt this freedom and joy in a long time, and now I felt immensely grateful for the decision to divorce. I could be perfectly fine on my own. Divorce didn't signify the start of misery. It was a rebirth. On the eve of my trip's end, George called me again. Nancy, you can't treat me like this. Weren't all these years of love real? His voice was filled with anguish. I knew Mia's tactics. George must have been pushed pretty hard by her. But, you used Rose's phone to call me. If you hadn't blocked me and Mom's numbers, you really used Rose's phone to call me, huh? So, she's right there, isn't she? How could you talk like that in front of someone who's dying? She loves you so much. She's in so much pain. George, she's dying. Why don't you prioritize her feelings and take care of her, instead of bothering with me? These were the words George used to kidnap me back then. And I was giving them back to him. I'm coming back tomorrow. Let's get the divorce papers done. In your dreams, George yelled furiously. I didn't care what he had to say. I just hung up. But as soon as night fell, I had nightmares again. Though I tried my best to move on from the pain this relationship caused me, I couldn't help but wake up from nightmares now and then, even though it had been days. Every night, when I fell asleep these past few days, I'd dream of that scene again. In the dream, George left me at the wedding. The lights shone on me, and everything around was dark. Faces slowly emerged from the darkness, all mocking. I was like a clown, surrounded by those faces. They laughed and accused. Love has no priority. If you're not loved, you're the third wheel. Nancy, you're the mistress. You're a grown-up and still quarreling with a dying person. How petty. If Rose hadn't left the country suddenly, their kid would be in kindergarten by now. At the end of the dream, I saw George. I ran to him, hoping he'd explain that things weren't what they seemed. But he turned with a cold face and asked, Nancy, why aren't you the one who's dying? George always asked if the years we spent together were all fake. They weren't at first, but when he left me at the wedding, those feelings became nothing. When I think about us now, it's not the years of companionship I remember, but the nightmares. In the end, I couldn't finalize the divorce with George the next day, because just before my flight, I had acute appendicitis and almost passed out from the pain. With trembling hands, I dialed emergency services, but the pain was so intense I couldn't speak. I even lost the strength to hold my phone. The phone slipped from my hand. Don't worry, I got this. A large hand caught my falling phone and calmed me with familiar, comforting words in Chinese. Then he coolly took my phone and, in English, explained my situation to the other side. With his guidance, the ambulance soon arrived at the airport and took me to the nearest hospital. The pain put me into a semi-conscious, half-unconscious state. I could barely hear the sounds around me, but my eyes and limbs felt weighed down, like they were filled with lead. It felt as if my soul was leaving my body. I sensed the medical staff rushing me down the corridor. We need to operate quickly. Is her family here? The patient is unconscious. We need to inform her family and get their consent. Her phone's ringing. It might be her family. Answer it. Put it on speaker. Hello, are you the patient's family? The medical staff quickly verified. The patient. What's wrong with her? It was George's voice. The medical staff explained the situation swiftly. I thought anyone would know what to do at this point, but I never expected George to smirk on the other side and say, Nancy, beg me to not divorce you, and I'll agree. The medical staff didn't understand the language, but I was so furious I felt like laughing. If I wasn't half conscious, would it be your call to make? Can't see well, can't hear well either. Don't understand what unconscious means. Beg you to die faster would be more like it. I was probably so angry that I forced my eyes open. I'll sign and tell him to shove off. I struggled to get up from the bed, and with the last bit of my strength, signed my name on the consent form. The pain made my writing crooked, but I still instinctively straightened my back, even though it hurt more. No one would interfere in my life anymore. After surgery, I was moved into a hospital room. Not long after, I heard a knock on the door. Come in. I thought it was a doctor or nurse for the rounds, so I didn't give it much thought. But who would have guessed? A tall man holding flowers walked in. He looked a bit familiar. You might have the wrong room, I reminded him, but the man just chuckled. No, I'm here for you specifically. You are. As he walked into the room, he gently introduced himself. I was the one who called for you at the airport. I was in so much pain back then that I didn't pay attention to what the helpful person looked like. His reminder made me think, and I was sure that he was indeed the man from the airport. I remembered his voice at least. Oh, it's you. I didn't get a chance to thank you. Thanks a lot. No problem. He nodded politely and placed a large bouquet beside my bed. It was a big bunch of vibrant sunflowers. Thank you. Sunflowers symbolize a new beginning. Congrats on escaping torment, Nancy. Escaping torment wasn't something you'd usually say to a stranger patient, unless, do you know me? The man hesitated, then laughed a bit self-deprecatingly. Nancy, we've been at odds for so long. You should at least remember what I look like. Let me reintroduce myself. I am Wayne. It's you. The name Wayne was very familiar to me, as he was George's nemesis. The first time I heard Wayne's name was when George complained to me back in college. George was top of the class, yet all the good things seemed to fall on Wayne, who wasn't even in the top 10. Later, they both joined a large design firm. Even there, the senior designers favored Wayne more. Later, the Design Institute split off an architectural design firm. Clearly, George had a better resume, but the institute sent Wayne to be in charge over there instead. George was really upset and called it workplace bullying, which is why he found me. We started the studio Boundless together. Of course, this was all according to George. Because of this, I thought more highly of him, believing he had some backbone. Since our work was so similar to the company's business, George always saw Wayne as his biggest competitor. To beat Wayne, George would push me to give 110% on every project. Because of that, I often only got 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. When we didn't have enough people, I would do site inspections by myself. One time, during a field survey, I fell into a river in the wilderness. It was winter, and the freezing water nearly drowned me. I crawled back to the shore with my last ounce of strength. Shivering, I made my way back to my car and called George, hoping he'd pick me up. That was the first time I felt helpless and scared. But he said, "Nancy, this project is at a critical stage. I can't leave. You need to be strong, okay?" After that, even when I was sick and hospitalized, I never showed weakness in front of George again. Thinking about it now, if I could be strong myself, why did I even need him? I blame it on meeting George when I was at my most vulnerable. His slightest kindness made me blindly loyal for years. At the time, my parents were in a car accident on the highway while coming from our hometown to celebrate my birthday. They both died on the spot. I didn't even get to see them one last time. I forced myself to hold back my grief and handle their affairs. I kept myself occupied with work and studies so I wouldn't have to think about being alone. Time passed, about half a year, and I thought my heart had healed. But when I walked past a bakery display window and saw a cake, just like the one my parents used to buy for me, I broke down. I sat on the street sobbing like a wronged child. I used to have my parents to comfort me, but now no one was there to wipe my tears. And that's when George showed up. He crouched in front of me, handing me tissues patiently. After I let it all out, he softly said, "It's okay. Everything will be all right." We ran into each other a few more times after that. He was always kind and patient. At least, during the first 2 years, we had many wonderful memories together, until we became partners and started the studio. That's when things started to change. "Hello, Wayne. Nice to meet you. Thanks for helping me out," I said politely, extending my hand for a handshake. Wayne smiled good-naturedly. "Nancy, it's really not easy to meet you." George usually handled project bids himself. I was often too tired from making proposals, so once they were finalized, I'd rotate shifts with project members to rest. So, I rarely met other colleagues in person. "Wayne, you didn't just come to bring flowers today, did you?" Wayne didn't answer. He walked over to me, leaned on my bed slightly, and looked into my eyes, tempting me. "Nancy, want to give us a try?" "Left George for you, huh? Your vanity needs that kind of quick fix. How do you know I'm not sincere?" "Just because you're sincere doesn't mean I have to accept." "Don't you want to get back at George?" "I do. But I have 1,000 ways to do that. Using another guy to provoke him isn't one of them. I'm stubborn like that. Prefer to fight my own battles." Wayne didn't expect my response. After a long pause, he sighed. "I underestimated you." Wayne turned to leave, but this time, I called out to him. "Wayne, I have no interest in getting together with you, but I'm really interested in the work your company does." Wayne looked back at me, surprised. "Does your company need people? What makes you think we'd hire you?" "The fact that my proposals beat you guys 3 times. Wayne genuinely laughed this time. He walked over, shook my hand and said, "Nancy, looking forward to working with you. I'll see you back in the country." Due to an appendectomy, I had to delay my return to the US. In the meantime, I asked MIA to handle my resignation. George called me multiple times from different numbers, but I hung up and blocked each one. He even reported me to the police, forcing them to call me, asking me to talk to George. "Nancy, how could you quit?" "I won't allow it," George shouted before the police could finish talking. "George, did you forget? I'm a partner, not your subordinate. I don't need your permission to make decisions. Even if you're a partner, you can't just quit. Is there a law stating that?" George was speechless for a moment, then blurted out, "The studio's resignation policy requires a month's notice. Company rules don't hold legal weight." "You're really leaving? Why? Haven't I treated you well? Didn't I let you handle all the major projects?" I couldn't help but laugh at his words. People can be so shameless. You don't know why I'm leaving. You left me at our wedding to be with someone else. Who knows if you'll run off with the company someday and kick me out. I cut him off. As for the major projects, it's not that you let me handle them. It's that only I could. You were too scared of losing. You shifted all the pressure onto me. If it succeeded, it was your leadership. If it failed, it was my lack of ability. But George, am I the one lacking ability? Don't flatter yourself. Treating me well. Give me a break. You're asking why I have to leave. Do you think I'm staying to help you all succeed? I'm no saint. Nancy, don't go too far. Go ahead and sign the divorce agreement, or I'll show you just how much worse I can get. George, you don't want people to know the real financial situation of your studio after our breakup, do you? After saying that, I hung up the phone immediately. I knew that George didn't want the divorce, but it had to happen. I never expected that the first person I'd see after returning to the country wouldn't be George, but Rose. Despite blocking her everywhere, she still managed to find me. She asked to meet me downstairs at the hospital. The first thing she said was, "I'm pregnant with George's baby." It's only been about 20 days since the wedding day, and George, who kept saying he didn't want to get married, had already gone back to messing around with his first love. Disgusting. Really? Congratulations. Do you need me to book an appointment with a proctologist for you in advance? What? Rose didn't get it. I smirked. Sleazy scum. Heartless dogs. Having a baby must mean you're, well, you know. Rose's face turned bright red with anger. You came here to get cursed at and didn't prepare yourself mentally. What? Expecting me to act all classy? How can you be so uncivilized? Rose's chest heaved with anger, but she didn't have any words to fight back. In the end, she could only grit her teeth and say, "Believe it or not, I never intended for you two to divorce. Are you expecting me to die and then take care of your kid? I thought you were just classless, but it turns out you're downright malicious. Nancy, do you think you're so great? If you're that great, how come you couldn't hold on to a man? Things worth holding on to are good. The ones we can't hold on to are just trash. I'm giving them to you as charity." Rose, although I don't know why you came to me, seeing you here confirms it. You really are pitiful. Pitiful? Why would I be pitiful? George is totally into me now, and he'll love our kid too. Even if I die, he will always carry me in his heart. Have you talked to a doctor? Do you know what it will cost you to have this baby? Rose's face went pale. She obviously knew that having this baby might shorten her already limited lifespan. You keep saying George loves you. If he truly loved you, he wouldn't have let you get pregnant. Whether you decide to abort or give birth, you're the one who suffers. His affection and longing, what are they worth? You don't understand. I don't understand. Depending on a man and a child to validate your worth shows just how little you think of yourself. Instead of trusting a man, maybe set up a growth fund for the kid while you still can. Who knows if someone else will end up sleeping with your great love and becoming the new caretaker of your beloved treasure. When I left the hospital, Rose was still sitting on a bench, looking lost and unable to snap back to reality. By the way, what did Rose want from me? Forget it. Doesn't matter anymore. Speaking of which, I should thank her. Not long after I left the hospital, the banner I had ordered arrived. On the red velvet fabric, the gold letters were brilliantly eye-catching. Thanks to Ms. Rose for sacrificing herself to save others and snatching away the scumbag. The shop even kindly put up a banner at the hospital entrance as a freebie for me. I initially thought Rose would go tattling to George. George would probably freak out like a fool and come to cause trouble. But he didn't. He simply signed the divorce papers quietly, then went with me to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get the divorce certificate. When we walked out of the bureau, George's face was pretty grim. "Nancy, you'll regret this," he said through gritted teeth. "Look at you, talking like you're already full of regrets." George's face only got worse. I didn't care what he was thinking and drove off straight away. That afternoon, I officially started working at the company design office. The team's really young, and everyone, though unique, was pretty cool. Getting along was easy. I soon got familiar with everyone and we started clicking on project plans. Truth be told, it's still pretty tiring during project rushes, but it's way less stressful than at the other place. After all, many at the old place were George's buddies or juniors. They'd slack off, knowing they wouldn't get fired because of their ties to George. They'd even think I was using my partnership status to boss them around every time I enforced some discipline. Plus, here at the big design firm, I could learn a lot more and even get tips from industry bigwigs. One senior even told me, chasing innovation isn't wrong, but a lot of buildings are meant for people to live in. Practicality is key. Don't lose sight of a building's purpose while chasing innovation. I once had a student like that. He had talent, but was really arrogant. He thought I was stifling him with my advice, and ended up quitting. Oh, so this is what George called workplace bullying. I thought I wouldn't have much more to do with George, until he stopped me with red eyes after this bidding event. Did you leave the studio because of him? George pointed at Wayne beside me and asked. In the few months we hadn't seen each other, George had lost a lot of weight. Even though he had cleaned up for the bidding event, his dark eye circles and bloodshot eyes showed that he wasn't doing well. Knowing he wasn't doing well made me feel relieved. Do you think Nancy's like you? Wayne sneered, showing great respect for me in his tone. What a show-off, running off with the studio's money and jumping ship. Scumbags like you have no place here. One of George's former colleagues chimed in sarcastically. Running off with the studio's money. Oh, is that how you're explaining it? I gave George a half smirk. Let's talk outside. George's face stiffened. He wanted to save face, but why should I cooperate? Is there a problem with me taking my share of the assets? After all, when we started this studio, I not only put in 80% of the funds, but also contributed my expertise. 80%? No way. My ex-colleague looked at George in disbelief, hoping he'd refute me. But what could George say? But you can't just join the company. Seeing George couldn't give him the answer he wanted, my ex-colleague rolled his eyes and furiously started accusing me. What? Now that I'm not carrying you, you finally realize how worthless you are and are panicking. Why would I panic? You really think you're important, don't you? My ex-colleague stomped his foot in anger. Oh, our Nancy is capable. She can win bids with her proposals anywhere. Not only does she think she's important, we all take her seriously too. Wayne mimicked his tone sarcastically. I looked calmly at my ex-colleague and said seriously, exactly. Why would you panic? There will be plenty more times when you won't win a bid. You'll get used to it. Wayne bent over laughing. In the end, George left the meeting place with his ex-colleague in a sorry state. The next news I heard about George was a week after Rose passed away. Wayne, the gossip king, was in the office giving me the lowdown. What was Rose thinking? She bled out to give birth to that child and didn't even get a chance to see the baby before she was gone. And the baby, born prematurely and weak, can't be left unattended for a moment. At first, George's mom could help with the baby. Later, she got tired of it and started complaining, often fighting with George and demanding he hire a nanny. What they didn't expect was that after George hired a nanny, his mom expected the nanny to cater to her too. It's hilarious. You should have heard the nanny cursing her out. Why are you so interested in him? I was a bit surprised. The kid spread all kinds of rumors about me when we were in college. Who cares about his grades? I'm just more capable than him. Wayne sneered dismissively. Little did I know that this gossip would end up involving me. George actually brought his mom and the newborn to block me at the design firm. Nancy, I know I was wrong. Now that Rose is gone, can we start over? George's mom chimed in. Yes, Nancy, couples shouldn't hold grudges. Since he's already admitted his wrong, you should come back with us. I looked at the two of them and immediately understood. Folks, this is a design firm, not a place for you to freeload a full-time nanny. Nancy, how can you talk like that? George's mom was a bit upset. After all, I had never spoken to her like this before. You speak differently to different people. For decent folks, you speak decently. For the indecent, you say whatever you please. George's mom almost fainted from rage while holding the baby. Enough, Nancy. I'm willing to reconcile with you. Can't you at least make room for a child? It's her dying wish. Can you respect the dead? I laughed coldly. She also wanted you to be inseparable in life and death. Why don't you die with her? No point in talking more. I had security escort them out. I thought George had too much free time. Otherwise, why would he keep bothering me? It's high time George spent some time behind bars. After I took most of the funds from the company, George signed the studio with another company to keep it running. But they weren't honest. They took a lot of perks from the company and hadn't been caught. Although George didn't actively participate, he turned a blind eye and got his share. I had discovered their tactics back when I was still at the studio. If George hadn't stopped me and if they hadn't paid the money back as first-time offenders, I would have reported them to the police. Since then, I had kept a tight grip on the company's financial details, not letting them find any loopholes. They were unhappy and continued to smear me even in the new company. I didn't intend to care about their fate, but since they kept jumping around, I decided to deal with them altogether. I directly met with the head of their new company. My abilities had been evident over the past year, so they agreed to meet and talk. No one knew what we discussed. All I know is that the next day, George and his cohort got handcuffed and publicly escorted into a police car, never to come out. I heard it was for embezzlement and they'd be in prison for a while, Wayne said deliberately in front of me. Oh, I didn't have much of a reaction. Nancy, don't you have anything to say? Say what? George is already in prison. Everyone recognizes your abilities. No one will say you're with me for revenge on that jerk anymore. Can't you consider me now? Hearing that, I laughed. I'm heading to greater heights. Can you keep up? By the time George was released from prison, I had already become the new head of the company. I heard that during his year in jail, his mom spent a lot of money trying to get him out, but got scammed. She even sold their house in the end. Taking care of the child wore her out, and she visibly aged a lot. When George got out, his mom thought they could finally enjoy life again. But George, having a criminal record, couldn't find any company willing to hire him, and could only do low-paying jobs. He even came to me, begging for work. The once high-spirited man now knelt at my feet like a dog, begging me for a job. Just like he abandoned me at the wedding, I pushed aside his pleading hands and walked away resolutely. You're not worthy. No money and still needing to raise a child. The burden of life crushed this mother and son. They became enemies, cursing at each other daily, even resorting to physical violence. Who knows how the child would turn out growing up in such a toxic environment? I wonder if Rose would regret it if she knew. But none of that matters now. What matters is, I'm going to live my best life.